Going to speak with Reverend Osagyefo Sekou, who is from that part of the world, from the St. Louis Ferguson area. He is currently the pastor for Formation and Justice at the First Baptist Church in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. He was born there. He has returned to Ferguson to organize on behalf of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, the largest, oldest interfaith peace organization in the United States, one I know well, helped me begin my activism career as a teenager, actually. He is also he's spent some time studying riots in London and England, and is the author of the forthcoming Riot Music, British Hip-Hop, Race, and the Politics of Meaning. Reverend Osagyefo Sekou, thank you so much for joining us.
I am so privileged, and I want to say thank you, Brother RJ. You all have been here, being witness and doing the work of the fourth estate, which is the whole corporate elites and governments accountable. And so, just thank you for living out the true meaning of journalism.
Well, I'm honored to have you say that, and my only personal regret is that I can't be there in person, but we certainly have got some folks there, and we believe it is very, very important. We believe, and I want to get your thoughts on that it is that these moments where conflict bubbles to the surface, perhaps becomes visible to people who don't see it, but for other people, for large swaths of our population, this conflict is a day-to-day reality. And I think we hope that out of tragedy perhaps can come a teaching moment for the entire nation. And do you believe that's possible?
Well, there's a fancy word that they taught me in seminary called kairos, when God is breaking into history. And so this may be one of those moments where something is happening because these young people have taken to the street and bore witness to the misery that they've experienced daily, high levels of unemployment, high levels of police brutality, low levels of opportunity. And so this moment, as you stated, is a moment where the world might know what the day-to-day realities of particularly young black youth are in America.
Well, and to that purpose, to that higher purpose, I understand you've returned to Ferguson on behalf of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Is that correct?
Yes. The Fellowship of Reconciliation is the nation's internationally celebrating its 100th year, the nation's oldest peace organization. FOR has done an amazing amount of work in terms of keeping track of social movements. It led the creation of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, led the first freedom rides in 1947, dispatched the great Bayard Rustin in 1955 to Montgomery, and continues to do work, including leading delegations to Palestine, which I was a part of in 2012. And so so I've been dispatched as a fellow for them, as well as an ambassador for them in various places around the world. But even more than that, I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. I went to high school here, graduating from Soldan High School in 1989. And then I have children here. I have sons here. And so I want them to look at me and at some point when they ask, when they were killing people like us, Dad, where were you? And I want to be able to say to them with some integrity that I was there defending you and trying to make the world a little bit better than I found it.
Well, and that's deeply moving, and I have to say that it does my heart good to hear the name of the Fellowship of Reconciliation again. They, back in, I would say, 1969, when I was in junior high, then high school, I lived near their headquarters. I don't know if they're still headquartered in Rockland County, New York, but in Nyack, right?
You lived in, yes. Shadow Cliff is our headquarters, yes.
So I was a student activist in those days, and we were trained there and inspired there. And Conrad Lynn, I believe, was there at the time, and a number of other great peace activists. So it does my heart good to know that there. In those days, we were struggling both on the civil rights front, but of course with the Vietnam War. Now we have, which is something I wanted to discuss with you, Reverend. I mean, I think we have the sense. It's interesting to me, in those days, when I was young, it was Vietnam and it was civil rights and it was, but there was a domestic and a global aspect to the struggle. And now you mentioned having gone to Palestine, and in an earlier broadcast, I mentioned the fact that Palestinian people were actually tweeting their support to the people of Ferguson and telling them how to avoid tear gas and so on. I mean, sometimes parallels don't work, sometimes parallels are wrong, but is there kind of one struggle going on now, or is this a connection too far?
Well, no. I mean, the reality is that we live that in that ever popular era, that word that we use so much called globalization. And so globalization is not only about the international flow of capital, but it is also globalization both in terms of struggle and resistance, both parallels. But those parallels are not an abstract at this moment. The police chief of Ferguson was trained by Israelis. The Pentagon, which provides resources and ships armament to Israel, is the same police force and the same Pentagon that distributed instrumentalities of militarization vis-a-vis these urban tanks, these machine guns that are being used and pointed at, and the tear gas that are being used and pointed at children. And I say children here in Ferguson are the same one that are being pointed at in children in Palestine. And so there is a direct connection both in terms of material resources as well as the spirit of this thing, in terms of the spirit of domination, the spirit of militarization, the spirit of impoverishment is all at work, both in Palestine and in Gaza, and the connections are materially clear as well as existentially clear.
And this is so much, Reverend Sekou, of something I wanted to discuss with you also, because I think, people sometimes think, well, we've got to deal with the concrete situation, and what you're talking about is abstract, but this gets very real. I mean, I think, they used to have a saying that if you give a man a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we have the situation where we had to have all this surplus military equipment and so on going to the police forces around the country. We have the Department of Homeland Security giving other, tanks and anti-personnel vehicles and all that business. And so, I think that it's real, isn't it? I mean, when we talk about the militarization of America's streets, our listeners who might live in suburbs or the countryside might not feel that, but I think in the inner cities, people do feel increasingly that it's almost more like an occupation than a community police force working with. Is that correct?
Yeah, no question that people are. I was in Palestine in 2012 and was part of a protest at Nabi Sela, and my feeling, like my visceral feeling, right? So I got Palestine in about 15 minutes, like just being in Palestine. I was like, oh, I know this. This, and so I said to the Palestinians who were there, I was like, oh, I got it. Y'all are the niggas. And so I got it in 15 minutes. That same feeling beyond the materialities of tanks. So that's on Friday night when protesters were tear gas. A group of us went out, clergy, and held the line between protesters and the police, the militarized police force, 4 armored tanks, about 25 police in riot gear with machine guns, pointing them at reporters, pointing them at young people. We're negotiating between the protesters and the police, and that feeling in my gut was the same. I was like, I know this feeling, and it was when I was in Palestine. So it's not an abstract. And then to think about, it is an indictment on our nation that we have surplus weaponry to give to policing systems throughout the state, but Ferguson does not have its own high school.
Right.
Right. It is an indictment on this nation, right? That we have a surplus of bullets and guns to share with them, but we don't have opportunities for young people and who are unemployed, right? So there's a surplus in the spirit, in materialism, and a deficit in opportunity.
And this is where I think a lot of people who are not living in these communities need to maybe take a step back and think about the things that they've been taught as assumptions are false. You know, I mean, one of the things that I learned at the Fellowship of Reconciliation those many years ago was not to dehumanize those who stand against you, but to understand that they have misconceptions that have led them to where they are. And one of those misconceptions is, you know, I reviewed 60 Minutes did a thing last year, counterinsurgency cops, about how the way to police our communities is by acting like the counterinsurgency forces in Iraq. Although, by the way, military people have been saying that these are much more severe in their actions, these police, than they would have been. But really, people don't realize, for example, crime is actually falling in our cities, and what we need is help to combat poverty, help to create opportunity, and all of those things. So, how do we, as those of us who are in the media, for example, how do we, you know, it's easy for, I can certainly criticize a 60 Minutes for glorifying the counterinsurgency cop and the militarization of our police force, but what do we do to get the positive message out that says that you all who think this way are mistaken, and here's what you need to understand?
Well, part and parcel of what we're wrestling with is a tradition of struggle. And a tradition of repression, right? Like, you know, our dear friends over at Fox News often act as though America just fell out of the sky with a black president and a multiracial democracy. The way in which I can have this conversation with you, right, in often multicultural contexts, with some belief that I won't have experience arbitrary violence. Now, the reality is that the Malcolm X grassroots organization, our dear friends over there, Lumumba Bandela and others, have noted to us through their report 2 years ago that every 28 hours, some black person is shot down like a dog in an extrajudicial killing by some form of a policing or security agency in the United States. And in most of those instances, those people are not prosecuted. So this is not something new. This is something that people live under every day. But part of what the media should be highlighting is telling a real narrative about the ways in which people are resisting. Right. So casting young people, right. So although there was some looting, I saw some of that. That was a small group. But what the story that the media didn't tell is that young, primarily black men, after the stores were initially broken into, went and stood in front of those stores and said, "You cannot do this. This is not honoring Mike Brown." Right. That story was not told. The story of us negotiating between riot police and protest so that young people could engage in their democratic right to oppose forms of repression in this nation that is the hallmark of the founding of America in terms of forms of resisting, right? Is that they can tell those stories. They can tell the story of Pastor Renita, who has been out praying with young people and who's just trying to speak into them life and reminding them that they matter, right? That story is not being told. And so part of what the media has to do is to usurp and get out of the pen. Not at one level, the media cannot continue to cooperate with the policing of free speech because they were pinned in last night. So we really couldn't see what was happening, except for those like yourself who were live streaming. And so the media has a moral and ethical responsibility to be the fourth estate, to hold accountable the corporate and governmental elites, and to ensure that there's an informed citizenry. That is a moral obligation of the media, and if we do not have them engaging in that, then our nation and our world will suffer for it.
Well said. And Reverend Sekou, what do you think will happen now? Do you have any idea? And what will you be doing in the next day or two there in
Well,
Ferguson?
I mean, you know, after you know, I personally made a tragic mistake of leaving last night. And, you know, if there's, you know, some social justice God I can repent to, I will, right? In terms of, I was part of, not in leadership, but I'm here supporting. I'm trying to support folks who are here on the ground. And we wound up buying into, because we were in the press conference yesterday about 2 p.m. at Greater St. Mark's Family Church, in which Captain Ron Johnson, who I feel is a good man, and he loves his community and loves his people, but seems the case that he cannot negotiate in a real way with the state powers of which he is a part of as a police person, told us that they would not use tanks, and then they would not use tear gas, and they did both. They did that last night. And so many of us who encourage young people to go home thought that we were done, thought that it was going to be safe and they were going to be okay. That did not happen last night. And so clergy are going to continue to go out. And I'll be part of that group. Folks from PICO are down here, Amnesty International, the Service Employees Union, Jobs with Justice, the Organization of Black Struggle, and other organizations like here, local-led organizations. There's a group of peacekeepers. And let the truth be spoken that the Nation of Islam, for all of our critique of them, in many of these instances, if they were not here corralling, protecting young people, there would have been massive slaughter. Right, because and again, this is not abstraction. This is not conjecture on my part. I'm saying Friday night, I personally had 25 machine guns pointed at me. Right, so this is not abstraction. So this is not. I'm not. This is not hyperbole. This is not speculation. I'm saying I know for myself that and that there were drones. Right, I know all of that. And so we are in a situation whereby we find ourselves suffering under a certain kind of tyranny, but the people will resist. And that part of what we need to understand is that these young people who are, you know, being called names and all of that, they're the only reason we're paying attention to this. They're the only reason. They took to the street. Some of them engaged, a limited number of them engaged in property damage, right? And that's become the story. And we forget about the fact that they shot this baby like a dog, left him in the street for 4 hours, did not contact his family, and or the EMS, and then put his body in a SUV that his body. So not only did they disrespect him in murder, in death, they disrespected his body by putting it in the back of an SUV, and now they're engaging in a third assassination, which is a character assassination. And so all of that is going to continue to fuel resistance among young people. It's the same thing that I saw with Mark Duggan and the London riots, right? That they killed him, lied, media picked up a narrative to a character assassinate him, and then continued to try to craft a story. And the crafting of that story, the media and the government officials in collusion are attempting to articulate a simple truth to us in terms of their notion of truth. So a simple lie that they are articulating is that he is a nigger who deserved to be murdered. And that,
right. And
go ahead.
And for those of us in the media, I mean, it's complex because yes, it's tragic that this young man was about to start college when he was died, but he doesn't have to justify being alive to anybody. So exactly. The fact, whether or not he was going to go to college, he was a precious child, and whether or not he took a box of cigars and paid for it or didn't pay for it or whatever. He was a precious child, and he had no right to be treated like his family had no right to be treated like that. They deserved justice. They deserve fairness. He deserved to live. So I don't know how else to do it in my job, except to say that over and over again. This was a child who deserved to live, who was shot, who was killed. Justice must be done in this case.
Yeah. And you know, and if it wasn't for independent journalists like you all, there's a brother I have not met. I'm dying to meet, Tiff Poe, who is a local rapper who's been tweeting about this the whole time. We want to say thank God for Black Twitter. And actually the founder of Twitter is here, but for Black Twitter for keeping the story alive, and for those young people who have consistently borne witness. And let's be clear, often people are saying, well, they're breaking the law by breaking the curfew. Every resistance movement in the United States was a resistance movement whose one of its chief activities was to defy the decrees of the state. And so the curfew is immoral and it is unjust, and that these young people are going to continue to resist it.
Well, I'll tell you, I guess we can just close with this, but I was in South Africa last year. I've been to South Africa twice, and they know a little something about resisting curfews and travel laws, a ban on movement there, and how that's a part of the struggle for justice. And I guess I would just close. Thank you so much for joining us, and I would just close, I guess, by saying, do you have any final words for us?
I mean, there are a number. So folks know there are a number of organizations around the country who are mobilizing. There's some deep organizing happening on the ground with the Organization of Black Struggle, PICO, and other organizations on the ground here figuring out a way that they can serve the interests and the needs of the people. One of the major things that we need to call for is an indictment of this officer. He needs to be indicted and go before the court of law to give an account to what his extrajudicial murder of Mike Brown, that the pressure needs to be on. And then secondarily, there needs to be a continued critique and defiance of the curfew in such a way that young people are safe and cared for. There needs to be, folks need to be dispatched to help these babies in all of this trauma. Right?
Right.
That they're hurting, like you constantly heard on the street from these people. They were crying, we're tired, we're hurting, just screaming and loving them, and so if young people choose to defy the curfew, we need not demonize them for that. We need to love them, we need to care for them, and we need to be with them. And then we need the media to consistently tell that story.
Well, and thank you so much. Our love and support goes with you as you are out there doing those things with them. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for representing all of us on that. And also give my love and memory to the Fellowship of Reconciliation. We've been talking with Reverend Osagyefo Sekou, who is down on the ground there in Ferguson. Thank you so much for joining us, Reverend.
Bless you.